Robert James Fischer, also known as Bobby Fischer, beat the legendary player Boris Spassky in their 1972 match played in Reykjavik, Iceland. This win made Bobby Fischer a very popular figure not only in the chess world but everywhere. And today we're going to focus on some of the key moments of the second half of this match. What we have in front is the position from the 13th game of the match, and by this time Fischer was having a 2-point lead. And if you want to know how he managed to get this lead, you might want to check my video on the top right, where I analyze the key moments of the first half of the match. And let's evaluate this position, which was one of the critical positions of the match in my view, because it shows some of the many skills that Fischer had. Fischer was well known for his opening knowledge, but what really impressed me about his win in this match was his fighting spirit and how well he played in the ending. So he was a phenomenal fighter who was fighting for a win in pretty much every position, and he wouldn't mind playing extremely long games. So let's now evaluate this position where it is black to play. The position is just extremely crazy. I'm analyzing the position from black's side, so black is planning to promote this way. So this position already looks quite crazy. White is a piece up, but black has 4 pawns for the piece. But white is trying to control the pawns, and additionally black's rook on g8 is locked by this pawn on g7 and this bishop. Fischer even allowed Spassky to trap this rook, so the position is pretty irrational. But if white wants to hold the pawns, white seems to be doing fine because the king is controlling these 3 pawns and the rook on d1 is holding these pawns. So if black wants to push these pawns, this rook will stop these pawns. And additionally, the king on c6 cannot penetrate through the d file because the rook is on d1. So maybe Spassky thought that this position can be held, but Fischer already here played a very nice move, again showing his incredible fighting spirit. Here he just promoted a pawn, he just gave a pawn in order to bring the king further to support the pawns. So here white has to take the queen, and now Fischer's idea is to play king to d5 in order to bring the king further to support either the pawns on the queen side or to support the f-pawn, depending on how white plays. And here Spassky played the move king to b2, now Fischer played f4, now the king is closer to support the pawns, and after rook to d1, king to e4, here Spassky played rook to c1, and this game is definitely one of the most important games because both sides played very well, very creatively. So we also need to give credit to Spassky, who was a great player and defending very well. And here after king to d3, Spassky made the final mistake. Again, the position is very complicated and we are reaching move 69, so after hours of play, it is very hard to play precisely these endings, where you need to calculate a lot of moves every time. And here Spassky played the natural move rook to d1, which as we'll see is a losing move. Here Spassky could have held the game with the move rook to c3, which is looking very similar, but the idea is that in addition to giving the check, white also keeps an eye on the c4 pawn. So for example, after king to e2, white can capture on c4, and after f3, white will be able to stop the pawns. For example, white can give a check, and after king to f1 and rook to f4, if black pushes the pawn, then now here white can go back with the bishop, even though white gives this pawn, and now black's rook comes to life again. After rook takes, white is able to stop these 2 pawns. Maybe this idea of releasing the rook from g8 was a point that Spassky missed in this particular position. Or another idea is that after king to d4, defending the c4 pawn, white can play rook to f3, now attacking the pawn on f4. And even so, this line has some tricks because black can try c3, giving a check, and white cannot capture on c3 because black would promote on a1, deflecting the king, and after king takes, black is going to win with these 2 pawns. But here king to a1 still holds the position because now black is going to collect some pawns and the game is going to end in a draw. Again, not easy lines after playing for hours, so I don't criticize Spassky for missing this defense. But in the game after rook to d1, king to e2, the main difference is that white is slower and not attacking the pawns on time. The game continued rook to c1, f3, play this idea of bringing the bishop to attack the pawns. But after rook takes and rook takes, rook to d7, planning to invade and support the pawns. Rook to e4, king to f1, bishop to d4, stopping rook to d1 ideas. But after f2, here Spassky, who is a very strong player, resigned. The idea is that if white goes after the pawn, Fischer has the very nice rook takes d4, and after rook takes, king to e2, white cannot stop these 3 pass pawns. If white gives the rook for this pawn, then the A or the B pawn is going to promote, so this is going to be game over. And I think that this game really broke Spassky because even though he continued playing fairly well, he also missed winning chances. So he was playing good enough to draw games. They drew 7 games after the previous game on which Fischer won, but Spassky missed a really basic chance to press in the following game. So here in the 14th game, Fischer misplayed the position. Now black is a pawn up. So here in this position, black could simply capture on d4, for example, bishop takes e4. And after bishop takes e4, here if white takes with the e pawn, then after f6, then this pawn is going to fall. That's why white has to take with the bishop, and in this position, black is a pawn up. We could argue if this advantage is enough to win or not, because it is going to be hard for black to create a pass pawn. So we see that these 2 pawns are being controlled by the b pawn. So here the discussion is whether this is a winning advantage or not for black, but black is a pawn up. So this is the way Spassky should have played. But instead Spassky played the move f6, which again for a play of Spassky's caliber, this is just a blunder, which we could understand based on the match situation. Spassky was tired, he was down in the match. So this is just a bad move because white could capture on f6, and the idea is that after black captures, then knight takes b5, this b pawn is pinned. So this would be okay for white. That's why after bishop takes f6, here Spassky took on d4, just one move later, but giving a pawn, because after bishop takes and knight takes, pawn takes, we get this position where black is not even a pawn up, so the position ended in a draw fairly quickly. So this draw most likely gave Fischer a lot of confidence. And the last game of the match, the 21st game, again shows Fischer fighting spirit. Here it is black to play. We have quite a complicated position. Even though white has 2 pass pawns on the queen side, these pawns cannot move because the rook is controlling them. Additionally, the rook is eyeing this pawn f2. So the position is fairly complicated, but here again played a very strong move and played the move f5, which is quite unpleasant to meet and a very important move in the match. And the idea is that black is going to create a pass pawn on the h file, which is going to be very strong. White took on f5, but if black avoids this trade, then black can play f6, and we get a similar idea. For example, after taking, now this h pawn is going to be very strong. So after f5, white took on f5, and now we get this position, this imbalance on which white has a bishop and 2 pawns for the rook. But in this particular position, black's position is preferable. Again, it is quite important that these 2 pawns are being controlled by the rook. Additionally, black has pressure on f2. And now black's idea is to activate the king and push the h pawn. Black first played f6, and after bishop to g8, h6, black doesn't want to hurry, and after king to g3, king to d6, white had chances to hold this position, but in a practical play I think that it is very hard to play this position as white, because black has a very clear plan and white's pawns cannot move easily, so this position is very hard to defend. In fact, the game only lasted 8 more moves. So this is how Bobby Fischer became the 11th world champion.